Welcome to my YouTube channel. On this channel, we find facts and fine-tune figures. Welcome back. In our previous video, we talked about how lakehouses are different from warehouses, and we show what is possible with lakehouse and what is possible with warehouse. What about in a scenario where you need both features of lakehouses and warehouses? So that is what we are going to be doing today. So warehouse, we are also going to ingest data with T-SQL and pipeline. But in our pipeline, we are also going to design a pipeline where you are going to get notification in your Outlook email or even on your Teams. And then we are also going to be transforming our data using visual query, and then we are also going to analyze it in a notebook. And lastly, we are going to be showing how to do cross warehouse query. What do I mean by cross warehouse query? That is when you are querying data set from separate warehouses. So come with me. So I'll be working inside a Fabric enabled workspace that I had created called warehouse tutorial. So inside that workspace now, I'm going to switch to a data warehouse experience, which is one of the 7 experiences with Fabric. So once I get to my data warehouse experience, I can then select the asset I want to create. Then I click on data warehouse right now, and then I'll give my data warehouse a name. I'll call it DW. Then I'll click on create. Once I click on create, our data warehouse will be created. Now we have our warehouse created. So on the interface of warehouse, we can get our data sets into it using T-SQL or pipeline. So our focus now is to use T-SQL to get data into our warehouse. So I'm going to click that right now. So once that is created, I have this interface where I can write my SQL query. But before you can actually bring data into your warehouse, you need to create a table first where you are going to be ingesting your data into. So I will copy and paste an already prepared SQL query to create a table right now. So I'm pasting the SQL query that we are going to use to create a dimension table now. Then I can click on run to create our table. So our table has been successfully created. Then I will wait for the table to be updated right here in the schema. So in the schema, to be sure that we have our table created, I can do a drop down of the schema, and then I will do a drop down of DBO also, where I will then navigate to tables. So I expect that we have a table now. So let's query our table to see if it was created. So I will click on select top 100. Now I don't expect to have any data inside of our table. What I expect is just column header, since we are yet to ingest data into our. Now you can see the column headers with empty rows. Now we are going to write another SQL query that is going to ingest data into this table that we have created. So I'll click on new query to write a new query for me to create and ingest data into this table. So I'll paste that SQL query now. Now let me explain what is going on with this SQL query. So we are trying to copy data into a table that we already created, which is dimension city table, from a blob storage, which is actually a public data set, and the file type has been specified to be a package file. So I will run this query now, and then it's going to ingest data into the table that we have created. So it will take it now, it's going to take a few seconds, which could be resulting from internet connection, or it could be because of the distance between where our Power BI is actually the tenant is located, and then the storage where we have our table. So now that we've actually ingest data into our table, I can then come back to this my second query, and then I run it again. This time around, I'm expecting to have data inside of my table. So now we have data inside our table. Then we are going to create a second data warehouse using T-SQL also, so that we can use the two data warehouse. So now I'll go back to our workspace where I will create the second query. So I can click on discard now, then where I'll click on discard now, where I will click on new and create a new warehouse. So I will locate warehouse right here and then click on new. So let's call the name of our second warehouse DW1. So we'll call it DW1 and then click on create. So once that is done, our warehouse will be created for us. The warehouse has been created. I'll fetch the SQL query to create a table where we are going to be ingesting our table. So I'll click on create table with T-SQL, where I can then have an interface to paste my SQL queries. So I will replace this query now with a query that will create a fact table for us. So I'll just do Ctrl V to paste this new query. Then I can run this so that we can create the columns where we are going to be ingesting our data. So I'll create a new visual query while that is trying to run, a new SQL query rather, where that is trying to run, where I'm going to now paste a query to ingest data into the table that we have created. So just like before, we are actually fetching these data sets from a public URL that has been created from Azure Blob Storage. So I'm going to run this query right now, and then data will be ingested using T-SQL into our second data warehouse. Also, this might take few seconds because of the latency in the difference in the location of our Power BI and where this blob storage is actually located. So now that our query has run successfully, I can then go back to our schema and check if our table was genuinely created and is populated with data. So we now have a fact table in the second warehouse. So I can click on select and see if we genuinely have data in this table. So we have our third query being trying to run right now, and then once that is done running, we'll see if data was actually ingested genuinely into that table. Now our query has run successfully, and we can see that we now have fact table in a second data warehouse. Now we'll be moving on to create a data warehouse where we are going to be ingesting data with a pipeline. I'll be creating a third data warehouse, and then we are going to call it DW, and then I can click on create. So in our third data warehouse, we are going to be ingesting data using a pipeline. I can click on get data, and then I'll do a new pipeline. I can then give my pipeline a name. Let's leave it at pipeline. Then I'll click on create. Once I click on create, it's going to open up the data factory interface for me. And the beautiful thing about Fabric is the fact that you can combine your data flow Gen 2 together with your pipeline. So now we have our pipeline available. This is a copy assistant that will always come to your face once you open for the first time, but we are not using that now. So you are going to click on cancel. So once you cancel that, then you have full access to your data factory interface. So we are going to do a data flow activity and click on data flow. So that will add a data flow activity to your Canva, and then on your Canva we can just give it a name. Let's call it data flow. And then for a proper configuration for your data flow, you have to navigate to this setting right here, and then there is no data flow in this pipeline as of now. So but because we don't have a pipeline then available directly in a data warehouse, we can create it inside of your pipeline. So we can click on new now. So that will open up Power Query Online. So once you get your Power Query Online, you are going to ingest data using a pipeline. So first on your Power Query, then to your pipeline, and then eventually that data will now be moved into your warehouse. So now I'm going to ingest data from an on-prem data source. Then I will click on import from SQL Server. Now to do this, you have to set up your data gateway. So I will click on import data from SQL Server. So once I do that, I'm going to fetch the server name, that is the server of my local computer. So I will go to my SQL Server Management Studio. Then I will then copy this server name. Then I can now go back to my pipeline interface. I can paste the server name right here, and then because I had set up my gateway, it will be automatically fetched for me. Then I'll click on next. So the connection will fetch it for me. Then if you want to configure it for the first time, you can actually edit your connection, and then you specify using your window connection, and then you can put in your username and then your password. So that is not what we are doing now because I have done it earlier. So I'll just go back and then start all over again so that it can fetch my gateway for me. So I will paste my server right here, and then it automatically connects to my gateway that I had configured earlier. So I will click on next. So once I click on next, then it's going to now show me all the databases that I have within my on-prem server. So let me go to SSMS now and show us the databases that we have in my on-prem server. So on my on-prem server, I have all these data warehouses, which is AdventureWorks, Contoso Retail DW. So these are the data basis that is within my SQL server. So I'm going back to Fabric environment now. So I can now see that I have those databases even within my Fabric environment now. So I want to work on this Contoso Retail data warehouse database. So I will do a drop down now, and then from there I can get access to all the tables that I have in that database and all the views. So I just want to pick channel dimension table now. Then I will click on create. So once I click on create, that data set will be loaded into my data flow, and then that data flow we can then add it eventually to my pipeline. So this is one method. Now I'm going to do a separate import for my fact table. for this particular data ingestion. So I will do get data once more, then I will select SQL Server database. So once I select SQL Server database, just like the same time, I will just do Control V, which is the server name, then it will pick up that. But I want to use a custom query because of performance, and also so I can point out custom query, so I can point out query folding. So I will go back to my SQL Server now, and then I want to query one of these tables right here in my on-prem data source, which is my fact table. So if I query that now, I will do select top 1000. So inside of my select top 1000, I can then copy that query and adjust it to taste. Now, so I won't waste time, and then our demonstration will be faster. I just want to do top 100. So I can copy this query now, Control C, and go back to my Fabric environment, where I can then come to advanced option and then paste that query right here. So once that is done, I will have to specify the name of the data warehouse, since I'm using a custom query now, so that I can now bring and ingest my data using this data flow. So the database that we are working with is called Contoso Retail DW. So after that has been done, I can then click on next. So once I click on next, then my data will now be inside of my data flow. Now my data is now being ingested into this data flow. Then I can quickly rename this and call it fact sales. So this is a fact sales table. Now there is something that is worthy of our attention in this data ingestion. Now when I didn't specify the SQL query, you can see that we have about 3 applied steps. We have navigation, and then there is this cylindrical icon right in front of each of the applied steps. So we have this one that is grayed out, then we have this one that is green. Now this one that is green is telling us that there is query folding that can happen in this place, and then when you have it grayed out, it's not sure. Sometimes it is saying that it is inconclusive. Now it is saying that, oh, the query folding is actually completed, and in another time it can be a red icon to just show us. But the one that I actually specified the SQL query to bring in my data set, we can see that it's just one green icon, so that our query folding will not be lost. So I can right click on this source now, and then I can view the data source query. So every transformation step that I'm applying that can be converted to SQL query will show this green icon that is right in front of the apply step. So let me just close this now. Now, one thing that is striking is the fact that from Power Query Online, you need to specify the destination of your data set. So I need to specify the destination for this fact table. Now, to do that now, I have to come to add data to destination. We know that the destination for our data is actually a warehouse. So I can select a data warehouse, and then I'll click on next now. So once I click on next, then it's going to give me all the workspaces that I have, and then inside each of the workspaces I can specify the warehouse I'm taking my data to. So I have all these workspaces now. The workspaces we are working on is warehouse tutorial. So I can do a drop down now, and then I will see a list of all the warehouses I'm working with. So the destination warehouse is this DW2. So I can select that and click on next. So once I click on next, I will get the interface that is going to be doing my data mapping for me from the source and to the destination. So I have this. Even at this point, I can specify the column I do not want. So for example, let me take out this ETL load ID. Let me take out load ID date and then update ID to. Then I can click on save settings. So the destination has been successfully specified for our fact table. Now say you actually made a mistake and then you take your table into a wrong warehouse, you can always come back here and click on this J icon, and then you can change your destination. But I'm not going to do that because I didn't make any mistake. I just wanted to point out in case you do that. Now the next thing to do is to also specify the destination for our channel table. So for channel table 2, I will repeat just the same thing. Click on add data, which is add data to destination, which is our warehouse. Then I specify the warehouse again, and then I click on next. Then lastly, I will also specify the warehouse I'm taking the table into, which is DW2. So I'll select DW2, then I'll click on next. So the destination for the two tables I want to use for this demonstration has actually been specified. Then I can click on save settings. So once that is done, I can then close my Power Query Online. Unlike Power Query Desktop that you do close and apply, in this case now you click on publish. So once I click on publish, then the data flow will be created for me. Now, before I go back to my pipeline where we are going to be doing some activity, let's check our data flow. Now, the data flow is already loading up, and once that is done, we can then come to our DW2 data warehouse and see that the data set has been ingested into this data warehouse. So we have done data ingestion using T-SQL. Now we have completed data ingestion using a pipeline. However, I would also like to show us how to add a Outlook activity to your data flow activity. So I'll come back to my pipeline. So inside of my pipeline, I can then come to activities. Right from activity screen, we can see this Outlook icon here. So I'm going to create a Outlook activity. So once that is created, then I'll be prompted to grant it access and give consent to this Outlook activity. So I can click on OK now, and then it will prompt me to sign in with my credentials. Then I'll click on my email, and then I can then give it access to my pipeline. So once that is done, I'll create a second one. So what I'm trying to achieve here is that I want to get notification if my data flow is running, and then also if my data flow is not running. So this first Outlook activity is for on success. So I'll call it Outlook activity. So I'll call it Outlook on success. I'll call it on success. Then I can come to settings where I can then specify the email that I want the notification to be dropped. So which is this my email now. So then I can then specify the subject of our email. Let's just call it on success also. Then the body of my email, dear Francis, your pipeline runs successfully. So that's my first Outlook activity. Then I will create a second Outlook activity where I will then call that one on fail. So on this activity now, I will give it a name. I'll also be prompted to grant permission like the first one. Then once that is done, then I can give it a name and then give it access also. So I will call this on fail. Then I can come to my setting now and then paste the email that I've copied earlier. Then I can call it failed pipeline. Then the body, dear Francis, your pipeline will please take action. So I had configured this for success and on failure. So what I will do now is to link up all this activity with my data flow activity. So I'll come back to my data flow activity. I can see all this little icon right in front. I have on skip, I have on success, I have on fail, and I also have on completion. So the one that is on success, I will point it to on success. And then the one that is on fail also, I will point it to on fail. So with this pipeline design, I'll get a notification when my data pipeline is running successfully, and then if it is not running successfully. So let me click on save, and then I will run my activity. Now let's say there is something you can do with your pipeline. Say you have several activity in your pipeline that you want to run, you can always validate your pipeline. So in this case now, I had intentionally left out something so that I can demonstrate how validation works inside the data factory in Fabric. So I click on validate. So once I click on validate, it's telling me that data flow is required, which means that I have not specified a data flow for my activity. So I can come back to settings here, and then I do a drop down. I can still see that there is no data flow. I can then click on refresh. So once I click on refresh, then I expect that data flow that we created with a data flow activity will now be added here. Then I can specify that. So once I specify that, then you see that it's giving me a notification that my data flow has now been fixed. So then I can click on run. So it will be prompt me to save, and then my activity will be running. So we can see the status of the activity coming up. So the pipeline is running, and then we can see the status and is on progress. So if my pipeline runs successfully, I will get an email. If it doesn't run successfully also, I will also get an email. So let's wait for the running to be complete and then see if our email is going to drop. So now we can see that our pipeline has run successfully. So let me check my email and see if I get any notification at all. So I have my Outlook in another tab, which I'm going to navigate to. Now I can see that I've gotten an email right here saying on success. So let me open up this email to see the email I have. So dear Francis, your pipeline runs successfully. So that is how to configure a pipeline that will get you notification inside of your data flow. Now we can continue our task. So I will navigate back to the last data warehouse that we created and see if we now have data set inside that data warehouse. So the two tables that we have in our data warehouse has now been ingested successfully. Then we can interact with it. Either you want to use SQL to query it, or you want to use a new visual query or a new report or your DAX measure. So first let us play with the new visual query. So this new visual query will give you a visual that you can use to transform your data set further instead of having to go back to your Power Query online. So this is a very cool feature that comes with data warehouse in Fabric. So I will drag my channel table into this Canva. Then I will also drag my fact table into this Canva too. So I will drag my fact table now. So once that is done successfully, then I can play around with these two tables and then play with the SQL that will be automatically, then I can play around with these two tables. So I will drag my fact table now. So now that I have both the channel table and fact table inside of my visual query, there are a lot of things that you can do. Now I can manage the columns. So now I have my channel table selected. So let me select my fact table. So now that I have my fact table selected, I can click on manage column. So when I click on manage column, I can choose the column that I want in my workload. So let's say I don't want stock key, I don't want day key, neither do I want sales key. I don't want product key also. So let me just keep it at sales amount and then leave the rest of the column. Then I click on OK. So once I click on OK, then I can view the SQL that is generated on the back end for that task. So if I click on view SQL now, then I will see that the tables or the columns of the tables that is selected is limited compared to the number of columns that we have from the very beginning. I can even click on edit this SQL now and play around with the SQL. So let's go back to our visual query and we do a little more transformation with our visual query. So on our visual query now, I want to perform a simple merge operation. So I'll click on combine and then merge query. So on this merge query now, I want to join my channel table together with my fact sales table. So I'll select fact sales table and then I'm joining them on the channel key. So I will join channel key from fact sales table to the channel table also. So it's estimating the matches. So we have a 100% match, which is 4/4, and then I will click on OK. So once that is done now, I can see my table right here being displayed. Then I can click on this expand, which is this arrow facing two direction. Then I click on expand. So when I expand now, I can then select the columns I want to see. So let me just select total cost. So once I have that selected, then I can click on OK. Once I click OK, then I can see that I have this table being joined to this table. Now I can also go back and still view my SQL query. I'm expecting to see a join kind of query. So for those that are not a fan of writing queries, so this is a way to actually generate some SQL query using drag and drop and the low code interface of Microsoft Fabric. So I can also click on edit and then play around with that SQL query if I want to. So that will be all for transformation using visual query. So the next session we are going to now is how we are going to be uniting and harnessing the power of both your lakehouse and your warehouse together. In real world scenario where you may want to do some data science workload on the data from your warehouse. But let's not forget that our data warehouse does not have a notebook. So how do you achieve this? So come with me. So to do this, all you have to do is to make your data available inside the lakehouse. And you know that from your lakehouse, you can then do data science workload because you can work with that data set inside of your lakehouse. So we are going to create a new lakehouse now and switch to a data engineering experience. So from data engineering experience, I will then create a lakehouse and then we'll give our lakehouse a name. So let's call it LH. So and then I will click on create. So once I click on create, our lakehouse will be created for us, and then inside that lakehouse we can then create a shortcut. Those are one of the major differences that we mentioned in our last video, where I said that you can create a shortcut in a lakehouse but you cannot create it inside of a warehouse. So we are utilizing that now by bringing the power of a lakehouse together with a warehouse. So now we have our lakehouse created. Now unlike warehouse where the only available option for us is a pipeline, in a lakehouse now we have a data flow gen 2, then we can use a notebook or you can even click a shortcut. Now the concept of shortcut I had explained in one of my previous video, where I explained that shortcut is just a link between the actual location of the data set and where you want to access your data set. So the data set you want to access now is actually sitting in a data warehouse that we had created, but we want to be able to interact with that data set in our lakehouse so that that lakehouse can then be accessible for our notebook for a data science workload or even any transformation activity that you want to include in your pipeline. So I'll click on a new shortcut now, and then the shortcut that we want is from Microsoft OneLake, which is the universal storage for all the assets in your tenant. So I'll click on Microsoft OneLake. Now once I click on OneLake, the data warehouse that I'm sourcing my data from. So I'm sourcing my data from DW2, then I click on DW2. So once I do that, I can click on next. So that will give me all the tables that is available in that data warehouse. So I will then specify the tables that I want to use in my lakehouse that I want to use to interact with my open notebook. So I'll do a drop down again. So let me select our facts table now, then I'll click on create. So that is going to create a shortcut for me. Now let's not forget that in our previous video we had also mentioned that the concept of one lake inside of Fabric is to have just one copy of data so that there won't be data duplication and data redundancy. So our data is still residing inside the warehouse, but is now available using a shortcut in this lakehouse. So in this lakehouse now, I will just click on refresh so that we can have our data available in the lakehouse. Now we have our lakehouse, we have two icons, we have a arrow showing us that it's data lake, and then this icon also showing us that it is also a shortcut. Now I will click on open a new notebook. Then from there we can now interact with our data set sitting inside a data warehouse, but we are interacting with it via a notebook from a lake house. Now our notebook is being created. So once that is created, I can then load that data into our notebook. From there, I can decide to do a data science workload, or I can include this notebook as part of transformation even in a pipeline. So now that the data set is now in our pipeline, in our notebook rather, so I can click on this three dots right here and then load data. So that will automatically create a Spark code for me. So I'm going to run this cell, which is going to take about few seconds for the first time you are initiating a connection. So I'll click on run cell and then let's wait few seconds, and then this is going to display for us the data that we have in our lakehouse, but now we are accessing it using Spark queries. Now our cell is successfully run. Then I can then change to pandas framework because we are currently on Spark data frame. So I will change to pandas data frame. So to do that, I will just copy the code I had prepared for that purpose, and then I can change that to a pandas data frame. So now that I have copied the SQL the Spark code to change from Spark data frame to pandas data frame, I will click on new cell, then I will paste the code right here. Now I have to declare the variable that will be holding my data. I'm using df here, so I want to use data now, df then data, then I will display data. So I can run this cell now, and then our data set is now available to be queried using our pandas data frame. So for example, now you want to continue your data science work, a new set where I can do data dot describe, and then continue and run this set, then you can continue your data science work. So now that I have my data in pandas framework, I can then continue with the data science workload, for example. So I can just do data.describe to get information about my data set. Then I'll run this cell and see if I can now use pandas. So I missed out on the spelling of describe, so that's why I'm getting error code. So I'll have the right spelling now and rerun my cell. So now I have every information that I want to see about my data set. Now let's go to the last part of this session. In this last part, we'll be doing cross warehouse querying. Now we know we have about 3 warehouses now. I have DW, I have DW1. So I want to query data set from DW and DW1. So how do I do that? To do that now, I have to go to one of the two. So I'm staying on DW. So you can see that we have a cross icon here. So from here now, I can click on this to add the second warehouse that I want to query to this one single warehouse. So I can click on this. So once I click on this now the caveat to this is that the warehouses that you want to do your cross querying from, they must be in the same workspace. So all the data warehouse that we are seeing now is from the same workspace. It can be another data warehouse, or it can even be a data lake. So the second data warehouse we are using is DW1 because we are currently on DW. So that is why it is grayed out. So the second one I want to do cross querying from is DW1. So I will select that, and I will click on confirm. So once I click on confirm, I can then have access to the two data warehouses from this singular interface. Now I have the W warehouse and I have the W1. So what I want to do now is to do a cross querying. So I'll copy SQL code that I had constructed for this purpose, and then we can use that to query from the two warehouses. Now this query is very similar to our join query in SQL. So now that I have grabbed the SQL query I want to use, I will just paste it right here. Now let me just run us through what is happening with this query. I'm going to select top 100 row for this query, and then is a cross data warehouse query where I'm going to do aggregation based on the cities that we have in our dimension table. Let's not forget that from this DW1 there are tables, which is let us scroll to the schema and see DBO, and then we can check the table that we have here. So in this first data warehouse we have our dimension table, and then in the second data warehouse that is where we have our fact table. Then I will scroll down on schema also and see the table that I have there. So I have my fact table in my second warehouse. So I want to query data sets from both data warehouses. So this query now, what is going on is that I have specified the city column from one of the tables, which is the dimension table. Then I'm also specifying the profit column from our fact table with a sum function. Now remember that we are querying these two columns from two separate warehouses. Unlike our join query, I'm going to specify the table where the columns are coming from. So I will specify the first table from DW, and then I will also specify the second table from DW1. So I will adjust this and change it to DW1, and then where instead of join on city key, fact table, city key, dimension table, is going to be a where, and then your where statement is city key equal to city key both for fact table and dimension table, and then I can specify my group by and order by. So I can then run this query and see the outcome of my query. So guys, this is the outcome of our query. We have been able to query from two separate warehouses, and that is cross warehouse querying. Now to do a quick recap, we have ingested using T-SQL, we also ingested using a pipeline, and then we are able to set up a notification on our email if our pipeline is running or not. We did also transformation with Visual Query, and also analyze with Notebook using a Lakehouse, that is combining the power of Lakehouse and warehouse, and then we also did cross warehouse reporting. Thank you guys for listening. See you till next time. Bye.